Well, good morning, Lionhearts. I know. I'm already out of the shower. You're like, how come your hair's not messed up? How come Jaw's not in bed? How come you're not showing us your coffee? I've been having a real difficult time getting motivated today. I don't know why. Call it like a slight form of, like, the bums or kind of depression or whatever. I don't know what's up. I just woke up and I was like, I don't want to do anything today. But, I have something that, this is what I'm going to do today. This is that secret vlog. Remember I told you guys like weeks ago, I was like, someday I'm going to do this special vlog, this secret thing that I've been wanting to do. I'm going to do it today. And part of why I've been putting it off is because it's actually somebody I'm going to see. And I met this guy like 10 years ago. He manages an apartment building. A friend of mine tried to like film an interview with him, and he was not real receptive to it. He's done it for other people in the past. The guy's a legend, and you wouldn't even know it. He manages an apartment building now, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over there with a piece of memorabilia of his, and I'm going to ask him to sign it. And I'm going to ask him if he'll be on my YouTube channel. If he won't do it, I'm still going to do a piece on him. I just think it would be much more fun to get to meet him. The man's name is Joe Dallessandro, and Joe Dallessandro was the cover of Sticky Fingers. He was on the cover of the very first Smiths album, and he was Andy Warhol's superstar. He's since become the face of the LGBT kind of start of cinema, which is strange because he's always been heterosexual. It's just the characters that he portrayed and the way that they filmed him during the Andy Warhol years always led people to believe otherwise. And the guy's got a really, really fascinating story, so I'm hoping to go over, I'm hoping to sweet talk him, I'm hoping he'll be cool. Basically what I think it is I think he does, you know, he still looks like himself, but he's much older now. And I think in some ways he just doesn't want people to not remember him the way he was. But look up Joe Dallessandro. He was in Dracula, Frankenstein, Heat, Flesh, many of the Andy Warhol movies. And also, what I wanted to bring up to you guys, I realize I've never really mentioned this to you lately, is that you're probably wondering like, hey, I thought you were going to be training with Dave and you're still not thin. Well, basically what happened was right around the 1st of January, Dave sent me a text and he's like, hey man, I still want to do this with you, I still am going to train you, but I sent my book off to the editors and they told me I have a lot of editing to do. So I need a good month of just locking myself in my apartment and working on that. So in the meantime, do this, and do this. So that's basically what's going on. I didn't give up. Dave didn't give up. He's just trying to set his goals. He actually quit doing any dog walking. He's really focused in on this. And so it will happen. But now I'm going to take Joe out for a walk, and then I'm going to take off and I'm going to go over and see if I can talk to Joe. I'm sorry I'm misspeaking so much today. My brain's like firing in a bunch of different directions, and there's a little bit behind that, but I don't really want to go into it today. Anyway, let's go on our trip. And if you guys remember a few weeks ago, I also said, if anybody has a copy of Sticky Fingers on vinyl, hit me up. I have an idea for it. This is what it was about. Vinnie Roth was cool enough to send me his record jacket, and he's going to get his record signed today. I think even if Joe won't be on the vlog, I think he'll still sign this for you. And the reason I couldn't have him sign mine is because he already signed it. Well, since I have a pretty healthy walk of about 12 blocks before I get to where we're going, I'm going to give you a little backstory on Joe's childhood because I think it will help at least, or I hope it will at least help describe how he kind of came to be. When Joe was born, his parents, even though he did know them, they ended up putting him up for, not adoption, but they put him up for foster care. And as a young boy, his foster parents would tell him later that when he saw the parents, he reached his arms out and said, "Will you be my mommy?" And he would later say that he thinks the reason that he might have said that was because he, up until that point, had not really had the kind of home life where he got to eat a whole lot, and he saw her and she was kind of a heavier woman, He thought he might be able to get some meals. Well, he was always kind of a troubled youth. Even at the age of 12, he was kind of stealing cars in Brooklyn and piecing them out and selling parts. And he would even say that, like, you know, sometimes people would pay and sometimes they wouldn't pay him. And he eventually got busted. And they sent him to a reform school. Or not a reform school, but basically like juvenile detention. Except he said in those days, they showed you a handful of places and they actually let you choose, but they misrepresented the places by making you think that they were going to be these great luxurious places. And the place that he actually ended up choosing was basically a work farm for chopping down trees. So that's kind of how he ended up getting his physique. He was there for a little while. He decided he didn't really like that, so he ended up escaping the grounds and hitchhiked out to Los Angeles at the age of 15. And upon coming here, since he was a good-looking young kid, of course there was a random man that he met that was willing to take him in, give him a place to live, and actually helped him make some money by getting him to do nude photo shoots. And this is at the age of 15. Well, he ends up not feeling comfortable doing that after a while, and he gets arrested for something. They find out he's underage, so they call his parents, well, they call his father in New York, and his father says, send him back. So he ended up going back to New York and living with his dad finally. Now what's weird is that shortly after this time, about the age of 17, a friend of his says, do you want to go to a party at the Campbell Soup guy's house? And he didn't even know who that was, but he knew he liked free food. So he went. And that is how he became involved with Andy Warhol. Oh yeah. That's neat. Look at that little bunny. Well, I always hate when people tell me no, and I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed. Here goes nothing. Pretty much there. Alright guys, well, as I suspected, he didn't want to talk on camera, and it wasn't really because he was ashamed or anything. It was basically because he says he gets tired of talking about the same old stuff, and a lot of it angers him. But let me tell you, he was super cool to me. He took pictures with me. He signed Vinny's record, and now I'm going to tell you. So he showed up at that party at the Warhol's factory, and Paul Morrissey, the photographer and the director of all that stuff, saw him and just loved his look and said, hey, can we film you? Do you want to do something? And they had just watched one of Paul's silent movies that he'd made, and Joe was like, it was a pretty good movie, but he said nobody's ever going to watch this stuff, so he was willing to do it, and they talked him into taking his clothes off. And he said, then they asked me to sign a release. They never paid me, and they asked me to sign the release because they were going to try and do something with it. And he said, I just figured it was garbage. Nobody will ever want to see this, so I signed it. It'll never come out. And it came out, and it became kind of a hit. And he said that Paul basically became like a mentor to him, and whenever he would have an objection to anything that Paul wanted him to do, Paul would say, look, it's for art. So they basically would tell him these were going to be art pictures that would be shown in a museum someday. And what they would do is, he had a real job. He worked as a bookbinder. And he told them that the only way he would make these pictures is if they paid him at least what he made at the bookbinding. And they paid him just exactly that. So he ended up making a handful of the movies for him. And it's funny, he said in all that time, Andy would only really say like 3 words to him. He would say like, hello, good morning, good night, and that was about it. I'm gonna get out of here so we don't look so creepy, but yeah, he said that, he said what eventually broke, the camel that broke the straw's back is he said he was making these movies, not really making any money, and he got offered to make a movie in Puerto Rico named The Gardener. And Paul Morrissey encouraged him to take this movie because he said, you know, this could be a chance to make a real movie with somebody else, maybe you'll learn something. And he was getting paid 30 grand for that. He'd never made 30 grand for a movie. And what he ended up finding out was that people like Francis Ford Coppola had wanted to use him in movies. Andy would tell them, oh, I think he does drugs. And Paul Morrissey would tell them, he can't learn a script, that's why we have to improv everything. See, how they would make the movies were that they basically, Paul wouldn't have a script, he would just go, Joe, tell me something about your high school years, tell me something about your childhood, Joe would tell him, and he'd go, okay, let's go with that. Let's improv something off of that, and we'll turn it into something. And that's how the movies were made. So since Joe had such a high respect for Paul Morrissey, he was always willing to listen to him when he had advice. But he said it got to a point where, and they actually offered Joe a job. Like, even though he was making so little, they would say, like, hey, how about, do you want a job working here at Warhol's factory? And so the day that he accepted the job and quit his bookbinding job, and he showed up at the factory, that was the day that Andy Warhol was shot. Wow. So anyway, he ends up making the movie The Gardener. He finds out that they had been basically telling people, you know, he does drugs, he can't learn a script, which he said neither were true. But he said when people that want to hire you for work are asking the only two people that work with you, and they're telling him that, nobody wants to work with you. So he decided he would fulfill his contract and go to Italy, make the last two movies, which were Dracula and Frankenstein, with Paul Morrissey and Andy Warhol, and then he was done with them. And this turned out to be, like, actually a good thing for Joe, because what ended up happening was Joe became an international celebrity as far as movies went. He started making movies with Serge Gainsbourg. He made like 20 years worth of Italian and French movies. Now, this is one of the parts I wanted to interview him about, and this is what he really didn't want to talk about, because what he told me in the office was, he said, look, he said, basically, he said, I made these great pictures because they wanted to capture the American market by using American actors, and they were filming them in English. He said they didn't want me to speak in French because they said it made me look ugly the way my face contorted trying to speak French. He made a deal with them where he would get a percentage of the royalties and he would get all this stuff, but he said then when they were done with him and when he came back to leave Italy for a while, he said they overdubbed all of his lines and never paid him for any of it. Now, Joe was he was the little Joe in Lou Reed's song Walk on the Wild Side. That was actually written about his character in Heat, I believe. And he said, you know, basically, he said, I was never a gigolo, even though people accused me of it. He said what it was that I basically led people on to get what I wanted. I would tease them by letting them think that something could possibly happen down the road. And over the years, Joe he was in John Waters' Crybaby, he was the cover of the Smiths' first album. Sticky Fingers. He has a massive history. So much history I really can't even go into all of it. But I hope this is a little bit of an introduction. And Vinny, my man, there is your signed record. I hope you enjoy it. I did have him sign it in gold, as I promised. Now, I know there's a huge portion of you that are right now saying, gosh, it's too bad you couldn't get him on the vlog. And like I said, I tried to. He basically, every time I would say, you know, I just want to do it for history's sake, or I just want to ask you about this and this. He basically just said, you know, I've talked about that stuff all the time, and I really only want to talk about it every couple of years because I don't want to dwell on the past. And he said he's going to be doing something at the museum in Memphis in a month or two. But I did happen to get a photo with him, and I did happen to have my camera rolling video when I did that. So here you go, guys. Meet Joe Dallessandro.
There we go.
Look up his history. It's not for kids, because he's nude in a lot of the movies, but he really changed the face of art, and he was as much responsible for the interesting art that Andy Warhol was creating back in those days as anybody. In fact, when Rolling Stone magazine came to interview Andy and Paul Morrissey, they ended up taking a lot of photos of Joe, and you can actually find there was a little featured piece on Joe Dallessandro in Rolling Stone magazine. Now, one of the interesting things that Joe did tell me while I was in the office was that he said for years and years and years he got no credit for that Sticky Fingers Rolling Stones cover. The Rolling Stones didn't want to pay him. I think they paid Andy. And so was until a few years ago they finally admitted they were his. He knew the photos were his. He knew where the photos came from. He knew all that. And he said that those were actually photos that were taken at Warhol's factory, and that wasn't the actual photo. The actual photo was all of him, but they just decided to zoom in and use that. I know it would have been so cool to have him on an interview, but to be honest, I hadn't seen him in a long time, and he wasn't really always that personable. This was really the nicest he's been, and I think it was because I was a fan. But I really wanted to respect the fact that if he didn't want to interview, I didn't want to push it. I mentioned it 3 or 4 times, and he would kind of go on stories, and then finally, at the end, he just said, well, thanks for coming and seeing me. I got to go back to counting money for the apartment, and that's what I do nowadays. And that was it. You know, like I said, I'd mentioned it a handful of times, what I did, what I wanted to do, and I just had to respectfully take that he just didn't want to do it. And that's cool. You guys can look up some of his interviews on YouTube. He did a really fantastic podcast with Alec Baldwin. It's called Here's the Thing. Go look it up, listen to it for free. I think you'll really find an appreciation for Joe Dallessandro. I'm back home, and look who's here. Look who's been waiting on me. Who wants to go out for a walk with me? Who wants to go out for a walk with me? Look at that sweet face. Look at that boy. Look at that little guy. Ah, you missed me, didn't you? You're super happy to see me. My buddy. And in case you guys are wondering how I know Joe, or how I knew Joe was there and how I met him, basically in 2008, 2009, I had a friend that lived in that building, and he used to stick his arm out the window and throw his keys down to let me in. And one day the keys went on the wrong side of the fence, and Joe was in his office and came out and let me in, and he always had like a real gruff exterior. And so when I went upstairs, I was like, Ray, what's up with your building manager? He always seems like he's in a bad mood or something. I go, you ever look at that guy and go, wonder what's his deal? Like, why is he in such a bad mood? And he goes, oh, dude, he's famous. And I go, famous for what? And he's like, oh man, he was Andy Warhol's biggest superstar. I'm like, there's no way. And then I look it up online while I'm sitting there and I go, oh my gosh. And then as soon as I, saw Joe the next time and let him know, I was like, oh wow, that's really impressed by what you've done artistically and everything. Then he was really cool to me after that, and always has been. I just kind of felt like going for a nighttime stroll tonight. I don't know why. I think I'm going to end up walk over to Amoeba and see what kind of records they have tonight. I don't know. Let's see where we end up. Well guys, I decided not to go into Amoeba. I just didn't feel like going in anywhere. I just felt like walking, so I'm walking. Well guys, I just wanted to say goodnight, and thank you for spending your time watching the history that I believe is important. And gives me something to do every day, and I appreciate you guys always watching and always caring. So if you wouldn't mind, hit the like button. If you've not subscribed yet, please subscribe. And from Hollywood, California, good night.